TGS Transform, Grow, Succeed, a podcast focused on helping you break down your organization's barriers to uncover, discover, and recover the values that guide your work. I'm your host, Tim Gravoy, and my goal is to uncover all of the innovative ways that you can drive meaningful change in your organization, and also hopefully uncover some insights on how to implement them starting today. On today's episode, we're going to be tackling PLCs, professional learning communities, and explore what it might mean to rethink this practice in the context of our work as educators today. And to help me, I've invited Rick Waski today. Rick Waski recently retired from his role as superintendent of schools for the school district of Monroe in Monroe, Wisconsin, spending 27 years in Wisconsin public education as a high school science teacher and football coach for 10 of those years, a high school principal for 8 of them, and a superintendent for 9. Mr. Waski has dedicated his professional career to ensuring equity for all students, developing protocols to keep schools safe, and creating meaningful workplace experiences for students in the districts that he has served. In retirement now, Mr. Waski plans to advocate for public education on a local, state, and national level, and he plans to dedicate his retirement for helping others. Mr. Waski, did I get that right?
You absolutely got it right. Thanks for having me, Tim.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to have you here, and it's an absolute pleasure for us to get started. So just to get our conversation started, we talk about professional learning communities. From your perspective, would you be able to share a bit about what a professional learning community is for listeners who might not know?
Sure. I had spent about, I would say 5 to 6 years, learning about professional learning communities, probably going back into the late 2000s and early 2010s as I was starting my work as a principal. And so I attended a number of workshops, and at that point, both the DuFours were still, touring and were sharing their experiences with professional learning communities. And I do think that the work that they did was really important, and it provided a backdrop and a landscape that school districts and schools could use to shape and kind of streamline their professional work. So in my experiences as a principal, I did a lot of learning about them, but never had an opportunity to implement them. In my first superintendency, which I spent 4 years in the Adams Friendship Area School District in Wisconsin, which is a very rural school district that was quite spread out. We had 1,600 students, but we had 5 schools that covered 500 square miles. So it was a very sparsely populated area. We had worked hard with professional development, and we had really focused on a lot of poverty work and a lot of holistic, kind of whole child approaches to our professional development. Ruby Payne's work was kind of the backbone of a lot of our professional development, and we really felt that we did a great job making a difference for kids in their ability to learn and getting them ready to learn. However, we weren't necessarily seeing the academic results we were looking for. And then after 4 years in Adams Friendship, I returned to the school district of Monroe in Monroe, Wisconsin, which is a town of just over 10,000 people and a school district of about 2,300 students. Again, 5 schools, 3 elementaries, 1 middle school, 1 high school. And they had spent 1 year starting on the PLC process. And I was very excited because I had done a lot of research on PLCs, and they were 1 year into it. And, I was very excited about implementing a research-based professional development protocol.
Yeah, so if I may just stop right there, because at the start of it, this is something that you looked into for a while, and you and you were excited to be in a space that had already put a year of work into it, and it seemed like a great way to continue and to advance the professional interest of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And the district that I was returning to, I knew a fair amount about the district, and so that gave me even a better backdrop on what some of our areas of concern were and some of the things we wanted to work on. So yeah, I was very excited. And our school district, our Board of Education, allowed us to really pour resources into the PLC process. We have 200 teachers in our district, and I would estimate somewhere between 125 and maybe even 135 teachers have actually gone to the 3-day PLC Summer Institutes that Solution Tree offers. So then that's better than half our staff. And all of our administrators have attended those. And in fact, a couple of them have attended a few of them because they would take teacher teams to them. So, our administrative team was quite immersed in what Solution Tree determines to be the best practices. And, I think that, we also put a fair amount of resources into getting some keynotes, speakers at key times in our district from Solution Tree to come talk to our staff. And, we had Dr. Anthony Muhammad join us. We worked with Jack Balderman, who had implemented some of this work at the high school level in suburban Chicago, where a lot of these schools, first adopted this professional development protocol. So I would say that we spared no expense and we didn't take any shortcuts in our implementation of PLCs in our district. So we were really hoping for big things because we went all in.
Mm-hmm. And that's actually, I think, really important to share. Is this kind of like I think for a while, like the Atkins diet was super popular. You're going to eat nothing but bacon or something like that, and and then people were kind of were maybe not getting the results they wanted, and the Atkins people would say, well, it's because you didn't really do it. But from your perspective in Monroe, no, you did. You sent people to the 3-day workshop. You had people, even school leaders, go several times. You paid to have, the names that you mentioned, my goodness, that's a check. That's a check for sure to get them out to you to speak. And these are people who themselves have spent quite a bit of time, perfecting this PLC model. What happens? And if you were to kind of go through the cycle of what a PLC is?
Yeah, so we've been in that cycle as a district for 6 years, and as you mentioned, I recently retired. It's my understanding that that the district that I've served is going to continue to utilize that model. But what we did early on was we really focused heavily on questions 1 and 2. We knew that we really had to get a universal understanding of what do we want students to learn.
And that's question 1. What do you want students to learn?
And number 2 is, and how do you know if they're going to learn it? How are you going to measure if they learned it? So we spent a lot of time in the first, second, and probably even third year of our PLC implementation and, making sure that we had a guaranteed viable curriculum, making sure that we had measurements for our learning targets. We're still looking for the magic data collector that best collects all this information. And I could do an entire 30-minute podcast on trying to figure out what to do with all this data. And we were in our 4th year of PLC implementation, then COVID hit. And I think that anybody who was involved in education at that time realizes that you had to put a pause on some things because we all had to instantly create virtual learning environments.
Yes.
And, the one thing I do want to talk about is, the teachers we have in the school district of Monroe and the support staff that support them are amazing, incredibly talented, incredibly dedicated, and they work tirelessly. And we did manage to maintain some vestige of the PLC process through all of the COVID madness. However, there's no question that the year and a half that we were really COVID focused took its toll on progress with our PLC structure in our district.
Well, and it makes sense because there's an awful lot of just time that's involved in that too. So you spent a lot of time with PLCs, and you've really focused on those first 2 questions, those first couple of years. What do we want students to know, and how will we know when they know it? And then I think actually now is a really great time to take a break. We'll talk about questions 3 and 4, and then maybe explore how PLCs work just a bit. All right, well, we'll be back in a minute. A smartphone app to support mental health. The Got Your Back smartphone app is designed to help prevent suicide and self-harm by individuals in mental or emotional crisis. Got Your Back is free and available now in the Apple App Store and in the Google Play Store. This app is being used across the United States. The app gives users who may be feeling anxious, depressed, or unsafe an instant connection to help. calls to 911, as well as to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline are just one touch away. Those preferring to text can send a one-touch text to the National Crisis Text Hotline. The app also has a My Squad feature in which users can send pre-written messages to up to 3 support people chosen by them. Users are encouraged to create a personal safety plan within the app. Calming activities are included, such as deep breathing, visualization, and refocusing exercises. The app also contains links to area mental health resources and organizations. The app's goal is to quickly get help and support to individuals in crisis and to prevent suicide and self-harm. Visit the Apple App Store or Google Play Store to learn more or download the Got Your Back app. All right. And we're back. So Rick, you were talking before about how you spent the first couple of years in your work with PLCs really focused on those first 2 questions that you work with in PLCs. Number 1, what do you want students to know? And then number 2, how will we know when students got it? And then the next 2 questions being, I believe question number 3 is, well, what are we going to do if students didn't know it? If they don't, we teach it and they didn't learn it. And then question 4 is, well, what if they already knew it before we got started? So when thinking through that, there's a lot of meetings, there's a lot of time that teachers spend, going over data, assigning students to groups. You really reteach and enrich is a word that often comes up in PLC models. From your perspective, about how much time does it take to really do PLCs this way?
Yeah, and we tried to give our staff in our district as much time as we possibly could. We started with an hour early release the first couple of years on Wednesdays at the end of the school day, and that also included after school time. So we had about 2 hours total with staff, 1 day a week that could be dedicated to PLC time. Actually, during the pandemic, we switched our PD days to Friday afternoon, and we actually released 2 hours early. So our staff had even more time every week to engage in the PLC process with one another. Unfortunately, what we found is, even as we were getting to years 5 and 6, we were still struggling with questions 3 and 4 for a couple of reasons. I think one of the reasons is quite simple. As we look at some of that reteaching, regrouping, and started breaking down what needed to be done, sometimes the classroom time and resources didn't match up with the needs that we were determining. And I'll give an example, and I'm just going to use a very basic example to try to make it as easy to understand for all levels of pre-K-12 education. Let's say you're in a 6th grade English class and you have data that says that this third of your students are struggling with this standard. That's great. We know we need to reteach, refocus, and provide some remediation and support for those students. Meanwhile, you have 2/3 of your students that they've mastered it, and so how are you going to structure your classroom? Let's say you have 28 wonderful 6th grade boys and girls in your English class, and they have a lot of personality and different needs and whatnot. And and it's very likely that you don't have a support staff or a teacher's aide with you. So how are you going to structure your class so that you can maintain, control and maintain an optimal learning environment, yet really give the students that didn't, obtain that standard the additional instruction they need? Well, one thing the pandemic did do is it got us to more trust virtual learning. So I think pre-pandemic, we really struggled with that. Post-pandemic, we learned of some resources and we had some ideas of how we could manage this better. The challenge is it never really comes together. It doesn't seem like it comes together the way we want it to. And whether that's resources or personnel, but it just seems that when you really get down to it, the students that are being addressed in question 3, we weren't seeing the success we wanted with them. We just weren't getting those students to the mastery level like we had hoped. And we knew the teachers were working really hard and trying to figure out how to go about this. And then I think the real challenge that we face, and I think the most underserved population from an academic standpoint in our schools today. And I'm not saying from a social emotional standpoint, but the most underrepresented population academically in our schools, I really truly believe, are the students in question number 4, the students that already knew it before we started.
Mhm.
And I will tell you, in 6 years of working on the PLC structure, I will say with complete confidence, our school district has failed to do anything substantial to serve the students that already know it.
Mhm.
And, a lot of parents, of students who already know it are looking for things like grade acceleration and, advanced courses. And we know from research that that doesn't necessarily allow them to continue to grow academically. Just because students already know it doesn't mean that they are prepared for independent learning. And it doesn't mean they are prepared for self-paced instruction. So we really need to do a better job of, and one of the things I think that we really, struggle with is we spend all sorts of time on questions 2 and 3, figuring out, okay, here's the data, here's how we respond. But did we really take the time at the beginning to figure out who already knew it and how we could grow those students through the whole process? So, I really think in 6 years of going all in on the PLC process, I would say one of the 4 reasons that I feel PLCs haven't been as effective as we had hoped is because we really never got to questions 3 and 4. We never executed question number 3. And frankly, we just didn't get to question number 4.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's probably more common than we might think. Just as we think we spend a lot of time, and rightfully so, with students who need to learn what our curriculum promises that they'll learn. We want to make sure that we have resources available to catch students up and to support and remediate where we can. And the truth is it tends not to be successful in the ways that we want. And because of that, my hunch is that we tend to get stuck at question 3, the what will we do when students don't know what we've taught, versus the, well, what do we do if they've already known it? Like we just don't get there because we don't see them as parallel. We see them as we got to do them in order, kinds of questions. I'm wondering if you got a sense of that maybe as you were watching PLCs unfold.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because I reflect back on, being I was a secondary science educator in my first 10 years of my career. And this was before PLCs had any kind of foothold, whatsoever. And, but at that time, bell ringers were big and a lot of, quick assessments in the beginning and ending of class. And they were highly effective, very low tech, but very highly effective in that you could really get a quick sense of, did students get it, right? What did they know when they walked into the door? What did they know when they walked out of the door? And did they get it? And it was very low tech. I still remember shuffling my piles of 3rd sheets of paper because heaven forbid we use whole sheets of paper, for a quick learning check like that. And I still remember shuffling my piles, and I could just get a visual sense of what needed to happen the next day. And I really think that's what PLCs do, but there's more spreadsheets and data, but I don't know if it's any more effective. I really truly, as I reflect on what I see our hardworking teachers do, and those teachers worked even harder than I did when I was doing that. But when I compare the learning experience of the students back when I used to just shuffle my bell ringers to determine where I started the next day compared to the PLC process, I really reflect on, I think that shuffling of the bell ringers and that immediate like next day focus, each class had a little different because this class seemed to get it and this class didn't, and we'll bring them all together. That seemed to be more effective than a much more structured process.
And that's really because what you're describing with shuffling the papers around I feel like that's what we would rather have our teachers doing. We would rather have our teachers just really have an in the moment sense of, all right, you walk in the door, I'm about to teach this thing. Here's a question or two or a prompt to respond to. I'm going to take this back at the end of class. Once you've had a chance to, how there's a lot of different ways to do these kinds of, entrance slips, exit slips, and things like that. But the times that I've spent in kind of observation cycles with teachers or doing one-on-one coaching with teachers, shuffling the papers around and really looking at the actual work itself, it tends to be a lot faster and cheaper than you looking at last week's iReady assessment or whatever it is. I think you talked about it, we're always on the search as a district for the next easiest district-wide data collection tool. And they take a while. Even the quickest ones still require marching an entire school into a computer lab, having them do a thing, creating a spreadsheet, and then looking at that. And we're kind of talking about exactly the same process, but I don't know that I need to take my shuffled papers to my dean meeting. But it sounds like that was really effective for you.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going, with the PLCs. I think, we never got to questions 3 and 4, but I think I actually reflect on the fact we might have got to questions 3 and 4 a little faster with a little more purpose by doing things that were more immediate and lower tech, and that kind of leads to, the second, shortfall that I have, observed following this process in a very, disciplined manner. And that is, if you would get our teachers in the truth booth and just say, all right, you've been doing PLCs for 6 years. How effective is it? And then another question is, are you energized by this work? I really think a lot of them, if they felt safe enough to tell the truth, they would say, boy, this is a lot of work and I don't know if we're getting the outcomes we want. And I also think you'd get a lot of them saying, this work is all well and good, but boy, oh boy, I'm struggling more with behaviors right now, or I'm struggling more with my students' mental health and readiness for learning right now. And I think that they a lot of times would put that even ahead of the cycle of evaluating data and using that data to inform our instruction. And don't get me wrong, I am completely about informing our instruction with student performance. But I don't know if this structure gets us there because it's so big. You know what I mean? And it's so, teachers go into teaching because they love kids and they love the content they teach, and they want to share it with their students, right? They want to share everything that they have to offer with students. And I just don't see, and that would be number 2 in my 4, reasons why PLCs really haven't caught fire the way that I think that they, we intended to with our staff, is because the process just simply doesn't inspire the teachers.
It's one where we spend a tremendous amount of time at the assuming the curriculum is set, that we have that guaranteed viable curriculum, which on its own is sort of a solution tree maxim, a solution tree dogma, which I can get behind. So you have to have a curriculum. We have to know what we want to teach. We can't have a curriculum-free school and call ourselves a school without a doubt. But then that second part of, okay, so we've taught it. Now very, very often the things that we're assessing don't really connect with the immediacy of what's happening in a teacher's classroom. It feels very abstract. It feels very separate from that. And the numbers that we're telling we are telling them to chase these numbers. Let's not lie and say that we aren't. That they're not really the things that teachers would want their students to learn. They might not even have the connection to the curriculum that we think it does, it seems like.
Yeah, and when the teachers aren't seeing the success, it's really demoralizing. I mean, we want to capitalize on what makes people want to go into education. They want to help kids, and they want to provide, energy. They want to provide support. They want to love kids. I mean, they really do.
Yeah.
And they feel they're putting their heart, soul, and everything else into this work. And if they're not seeing the results, it's incredibly demoralizing to them, and they feel like they're not succeeding when they're doing masterful work. And and that kind of leads into, you know, our teachers right now, nationally, it's every state's feeling it, every community's feeling it. There's a teacher shortage that we probably never would have anticipated, 20, 30 years ago. And many of the things that drew people into education, some of the stability, benefits, community respect, a lot of those things have kind of, stumbled or been eroded a little bit. And as a result, we've seen greater teacher turnover. And the third thing that I think has inhibited success of PLCs in the district I served is that I don't think PLCs necessarily fit the turnover we're seeing in education today. Mm-hmm. We're putting a lot of people in classrooms who aren't fully trained to be educators. And we never would have imagined that 20 years ago. We never would have imagined hiring somebody who didn't have complete credentials. I mean, I still remember back early in my principal career where we would have, and again, I was a high school principal, and we would post a social studies or an English position, and we would have 50 to 100 applicants. Mm-hmm. And my peers who were elementary principals would talk about, hey, every time we have a job open, we have 100 applicants. Mm-hmm. Now, even in our elementary grade levels, sometimes we have less than 10, and in some areas of need, we don't have any qualified applicants. Yeah. And we have to create teachers from whatever we can come up with. And, I think our schools have become active. I don't want to say teacher colleges, but I can't come up with a better word. Yeah. Like it's on the job training. Mm-hmm. And we have our principals, assistant principals, district leaders, but most importantly, the teachers need to mentor and help these people grow into competent educators. And the good news is we're getting there. Like we're bringing people into the profession who aren't fully prepared, and we're getting a lot of them to become good teachers quickly. But that takes a lot of work. That takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of collaboration. And I think if we're fully committing our time to the PLC work, it becomes very difficult to also commit the time and energy we need to just to get people to be prepared to be classroom educators.
So Rick, you said something here that's really interesting for two reasons to me. One is that in the climate that we are, where we have more and more people entering the profession, entering into classrooms that just need to know some basic nuts and bolts of what this craft is of teaching, that to spend the hours, and it is hours and hours a week in PLC work. Some superintendents might say, no, actually, that's the one thing they absolutely must do. They must get steeped into PLC work, and if they do that, they'll understand what students need to know and what to do, and that's going to be a big source of their professional growth and training. And you're saying, no, there's just things that are even before that are just foundational, that if they aren't there, nothing that we're going to do in a professional learning community makes a lot of sense. But the other thing is that, well, we've done PLCs for quite a while now. They're not super duper inspiring. Might the PLCs actually be part of the reason we're seeing this kind of turnover?
Yeah,
I know I'm asking you a hard thing where it's
it's a tough question. I would say I was the superintendent who really felt that the process would provide that growth and support.
Oh, I was the principal who thought so too. Yeah.
Right. And what I learned is, like you said, the needs were more basic. Mm-hmm. And they weren't necessarily curriculum focused or even necessarily instruction in the content focused, but a lot of them were just classroom management, mm-hmm. making connections with students, making connections with parents. Mm-hmm. Just, a lot of the stuff that we used to rely on, student teaching and practicums to prepare. But I mean, what percentage of our teachers right now had traditional student teaching experiences? Wisconsin, I think the last U.S. News and World Report, I think Wisconsin was 8th in the country in, the public education systems. We always rank fairly high, but the number of teachers we have in our classrooms who had the full set of pre-professional experiences that universities offer is a fraction of what it once was.
Mm-hmm.
So part of that process is just getting teachers, connected. And and I'm going to go off on a tangent here, but I really think that if the trends in the workforce continue in education, I really think that we're going to have to provide, kind of more extended, longer teacher and training type experiences for these new educators, that might extend a year or two.
Mm-hmm.
And in the process, I'm convinced that we can get those people probably even a better professional capacity than we used to offer them in the past when they just finished their traditional programs. But in the process, it's going to take time. It's going to take resources, right? Because it's more expensive now if you have mentor teachers working collaboratively, with your newer educators, and that costs money. So, I mean, I just look at the time, and it just is a ton of time that you have to dedicate to PLCs, and I just think it's kind of counterintuitive to where we are with the workforce now, and we can't control the workforce. Like, yep, we need to get more people in the pipeline. That's great, but we don't see the benefit of that until 10 years later at the earliest, right? So what we really need to do is deal with what we have now, and I just don't know, with the turnover we see in the profession right now, that we can provide this in depth of a data-based process that we do with PLCs. And then, lastly, I guess my fourth, this kind of lumps into the other thing is, there's a lot of things school districts need to work through with their staff that are not part of, mastery of standards. They're just not.
Well, let's actually get to that point. Actually, if we could take a break and we'll get back to that point, because I think that's really thing too, because I actually think it really connects to your last point, just that if you don't know how to build relationships with students, a PLC is not going to teach you how to do that. That's not the kind of PD that's going to do it. And then it sounds like your point 4 might actually be exactly kind of connected to that. Let's take a break and let's explore that in just a second. TGS Educational Consulting provides training in positive behavior interventions and support, PBIS, at all tiers of implementation. And our exceptional PBIS work is often the first way schools get to know TGS Educational Consulting. Schools choose TGS for PBIS training because of our highly personalized approach and exceptional levels of coaching and support from start to finish. Whether your school is just starting or has been implementing PBIS for a while, contact Dr. Tim Gravoy at TGS Educational Consulting for a free initial consultation. Dr. Tim's email is tim@tgseducationalconsulting.com. Once again, that email is tim@tgseducationalconsulting.com. And we're back. So, Rick, one of the things that you said, you're talking about your point number 3 in terms of what we need to explore if PLCs are actually going to work, was just this idea of there's some things that you just need to know about the workforce in education right now. And one of the things is that a lot of folks are coming to the classroom without necessarily completing a degree in education. In Arizona, that's definitely the case, where instead of raising, there's a whole different show perhaps, but there's things that can be done to attract people to the profession, and then there's things that can be done to just make more people eligible. And Arizona has chosen to make more people eligible, where it's you have a degree and a pulse, you can teach in a classroom. But there's things you have to know in order to get 28 sixth graders in an English class to learn something about main idea and supporting details today. There's things that have to happen that are more important even than being a good English student yourself. And so I'm wondering how that connects to PLCs, that if that is the case, that if there's things that I guess I'm wondering, what are the kinds of things that a PLC really isn't for and isn't going to be able to prepare a teacher to do?
Yeah, well, and that's kind of, as I, have, retired, one of my reflections is that, I do have some regret about some non-PLC work that we just simply weren't able to accomplish that our staff and students really needed. Like many communities, Monroe is becoming more diverse. And as it's becoming more diverse, we really do need to focus on, equity, and we do need to focus on making sure that we have students feeling safe at school. And, we started, I think the George Floyd incident a few years ago was a catalyst, and we happened to be in our COVID pause at the time. So we really, that, incident and some of the resulting feelings that our students, both present and former students, had about their experience in our district really opened our eyes to the fact that we needed to do some equity work in our district. And I think in the last couple of years, we tried to focus on that work in parallel with the PLC process. But the way the PLC process works, and if you're going to do it to fidelity, you need to put that time in. And I often had my principals, literally disappointed in me that we were going to have some PD on equity, that we were bringing somebody in to work with us on, understanding different perspectives that different students might have, and, looking at racial equity, looking at gender equity, and, and some of those kinds of things. And and the work was good, and teachers responded to it. Some liked it, some didn't, but it was, I think people universally realized it was important. But literally there was a tug of war with time, right? Like, just bringing somebody in, we had a wonderful person, kind of equity coach, working with us, and we're about 6 hours from the Twin Cities. We're on Monroe's on the Wisconsin-Illinois border, but we had a gentleman working who worked in the Minneapolis Public School District, who, and, so they were front and center during the George Floyd situation, and he had a lot of great ideas and for our staff to better help create an environment of inclusion for everybody in our schools. And people really responded to him. But even just to bring him in to just provide some tier 1 coaching to our staff 3 times in a year, well, boom, there's 3 PLC slots that you have to abandon. And then if you're going to do any follow-up work, you're going to be removing some more time from those collaborations. So it really becomes difficult. If you fully commit to the PLC process, you're pretty much ensuring that there will be no other professional development. And I don't necessarily know if that's reactive enough to what we need to do. Obviously, I've only been a school leader post Columbine. So, I hear from people who are in leadership positions, previous, when we didn't think about school violence as much as we do now. And obviously it's in our hearts and minds, at the current moment. But that work's important. That school safety work's important, right? It shouldn't take a back seat. But if we're feeling like we have to choose between that work and the data-based, mastery of standard of our students, I'm inclined to think that keeping people safe and keeping people alive in schools is more critical than perhaps data-based, response to how students are learning, or mastering their standards. Now, it's all important. Don't get me wrong, it's all important. But I really think that, to address the PLC work with fidelity pretty much requires that you're not going to engage in additional PLC because there's just not enough hours in a day, days in the week, et cetera. And, I still think there's a lot of ways that we can have classrooms that are responsive to what students are learning without indicating or without committing to not engaging in any other professional development, and
it almost goes back to the papers that you were shuffling earlier. It's that that if and that's kind of the hunch that I've had for a long time about PLCs, is that there's a lot in it that just the logic of it seems kind of good, that it makes sense, and the truth is, if you're going to do it, you really are committing every last minute that you've got that isn't already committed to instruction, to engaging in the work of professional learning communities, which means that anything that can't be taught that way or can't be learned that way can't really happen unless you're willing to mess with the fidelity of PLCs. And that becomes a very hard bargain, as a superintendent or as a principal to make, that we can't learn anything else except for PLCs because that's the only time we've got, even if George Floyd has been murdered and we clearly have equity issues that we must address, or clearly if we have school safety issues that we must make sure everyone is on board for. And that becomes a really tricky thing, I think, for school leaders to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I at times think that we just throw out, the hierarchy of needs out the window. But if you don't feel safe at school,
Yeah.
whether it be physical safety or emotional safety, like the rest doesn't matter.
Mhm.
And, so I guess I'm going to get to my final evaluation. Like we went all in for 6 years on PLCs, and I will say with complete confidence, we didn't move the bar data wise.
Mhm.
And we went through some very, very difficult times. I understand with COVID and pivoting to virtual instruction and all the things we had to do nationwide. It might not be the best time to evaluate the effectiveness, but after, fully immersing our district in the PLC process over the last 6 years, I truly am unsure whether we've gotten the bang for the buck that we need to in order to use this professional time, really wisely. And one of the things that, I really would encourage, I spent 9 years as a district leader, and I worked in 2 districts where our school board really let me be
Mhm.
the visionary leader for the district. I mean, they really entrusted me with the ability to, create a vision for learning in our district. And I'm very grateful for that. A lot of people in my profession have not had school boards that have let them lead.
Mhm.
And our boards in Adams Friendship and Monroe really let me lead. And the reflection I have, on my work professionally is that, just like a classroom teacher, it's, there's more to it than the curriculum.
Mm.
I think as a superintendent, there's more to it than whatever professional development process or structure you decide to follow. It needs to be responsive. Like what you do needs to be responsive to the here and now.
Mhm.
I started as a superintendent 10 years ago, and frankly, you know, the teachers we were receiving 10 years ago that were applying for our jobs are different than the ones we have now. Um, the school safety issue has ebbed and flowed, and awareness of that has ebbed and flowed. Um, and we keep talking about student achievement and what's not being accomplished. And I don't think we take enough time to celebrate what is being accomplished, because there's a lot of things that schools are doing so much better now than they did when I was a student or when you were a student, Tim,
Mhm.
that we don't even celebrate. I mean, I look at some of the school to work and workplace connections we provide kids now compared to what was available when I was a student in the 80s. And I always tell people, I went through school in the 80s, man. And if you could, and if you could survive education in the 80s
Mhm.
and end up being productive, in your 40s and 50s, you deserve a gold star. Like we do a lot of things better than we used to. And I don't think we always take time to celebrate that.
Yeah.
A lot of times we're focusing on our shortcomings and, proficiency levels. Well, I'm not sure our proficiency levels were so great 30, 40, 50 years ago. We just
Mhm.
didn't keep track of them, and we didn't politicize it either.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
like, bottom line was, I mean, there was some things that were going on educationally
Yeah.
when I was going through school that are not to be celebrated
Mhm.
and weren't best practice. And I think a lot of those things you just don't see in our schools now.
Mhm.
And I think we need to celebrate that. I also think, we still have international students from all over the world knocking themselves out to attend our colleges and universities in this country. It's a massive influx in, and it's not a massive influx out. All over the world, people want their children to understand what's going on in America.
Mm-hmm.
And they want them to learn in the United States of America. Even if they're going to come back to their home country, there's a reason for that. And I don't think we talk about that. I don't think politicians talk about it. And I don't even think sometimes teachers celebrate it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, talk to any admissions counselor at any public or private university, and they'll tell you the absolute urgency that they see in international students wanting to learn in our higher education institutions in the United States, or even coming here as exchange students for K-12 experiences. Like, there's some stuff we do pretty well, and we don't even, like, it's almost like it doesn't exist to our teachers. And I think we need to build our teachers up. Like, you guys do amazing things. Like, we educate everybody.
Yep.
Let's celebrate that.
Yeah.
So again, I have nothing against, obviously the DuFours have passed, and I'm very grateful for the work they've done. Solution Tree has been an incredibly successful company, and, more power to them. But the reality is, the PLC structure to fidelity, I have found is it's very difficult to meet other professional development goals. And when it really comes down to, our teachers need to be inspired. And the one reflection I have, if I go back to the boards, I served as a superintendent, in the last 9 years, and they'd say, well, what do you regret? Well, what I regret is that I didn't further amplify our teachers' voices and what they needed.
Well, you know what? Let's our next section is always kind of the takeaway section, and I think I'd like that. I think that would be a good way for us to kind of end the conversation today, because it really just makes sense. There's a whole study from the Gates Foundation that talks about how school leaders think that we need to spend lots and lots and lots more time on PLCs. Teachers think, by and large, they're a waste of time. And that gap is really important to address. And you're honestly the first superintendent I've talked to that's willing to address it so quite as candidly. And then similarly, I also feel really grateful for the DuFours for helping us rethink what teaching and learning really needs to focus on. And yet the kind of how that's been operationalized and what that actually means in a school, like, there's some things that have to be addressed there too, for sure. Well, let's take a break for just a second, and we'll come back and let's talk about amplifying teacher voices. Educational inequity is real, but equity is possible, and you can achieve it in your schools. You can change the story. School Leadership for Social Justice helps educators, schools, and districts start, deepen, and sustain their educational equity work and accelerate academic excellence. SLSJ is an IRS-recognized 501c3 serving schools, districts, and education-adjacent organizations. Contact Dr. Charla Horton-Williams, co-founder of School Leadership for Social Justice today, at charla@slsj.us. And we're back. So at the end of every episode, I like to provide some takeaways from the discussion and how we might be practical about applying it to our own leadership practice and work leading instruction in schools. And so before break, Rick, you were talking about how just a thing that you wish you could have done more of as a superintendent was really amplify teacher voices. Would you tell me more about that? How does that connect with our conversation about PLCs, and what would you want to amplify?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times, and part of it's just because of pressure we feel as school leaders. I think we focus on the deficiencies of the work we're doing and what's not being accomplished. And I get it. Like, there are things, there's data we see as school leaders that we're not happy with. And, we want to address, we want to fix the problems, right? But we have to remember that where's the real work being done? Like, where are the kids learning? It's in the classroom with the teachers. And, I talk about the truth booth a lot. And part of it is I had the unique experience of being a high school principal in a school district Monroe, where I was the high school principal. Then I left to be a superintendent somewhere else, and then I came back. And coming back, I had this built-in sector of teachers who remembered me as a principal and kind of felt safe, sharing things with me. And then, of course, because of my children being in the same school I served, a lot of, the staff members are also parents, and they kind of knew me at the parent level. And a lot of times when I would have, meaningful conversations with our staff, I realized like that's where the ideas really come from. And that's, that's the work we really need to do. And I don't, school districts are notorious for jumping all over the board and trying to, chase whatever's hot for professional development. I don't recommend that at all. I mean, I think districts really do need to say, hey, what are the, two and at the most three, but, things that we really need to focus on and get better at. And I think we need to provide, we talk about providing voice and choice for our students, but we need to provide voice and choice for our teachers. And, we need them to understand, professional learning is critical in our future success as an organization. But we also want to provide you what you need, or at least give you a pathway that you feel better following.
Yes.
And, and that's one thing that, I would really encourage, my peers, at the superintendent level is do what you can to amplify the voice of your educators. I gave a number of anonymous surveys that, as a superintendent, and they were great starting points to give us some information on, what teachers really felt. And I did everything I could to make sure that they knew they were anonymous and whatnot. But that data you need to follow up with that data and get, kind of dig in and talk to people. And I would encourage, I mean, no matter how big your district is as a superintendent, you got to get right down to the teacher level. And when I say down to the teacher level, I mean like in person with teachers and have some conversation about what they need. And it can be that simple, spend 15 minutes in the classroom. And then when the kids shuffle off to the next class or their special or recess or whatever's next, lunch, you might get trampled on the way to lunch. But, just spend, 30 seconds just asking like, what do you need? And keep track of it. I mean, we talk about that, how critical it is that you keep data on student achievement, but do we ever talk about what information do we collect as school leaders?
Yeah.
And how many times do you have a super meaningful conversation, but then forget it?
Yeah.
Like take the time to record it. Take the time to put it in a spreadsheet, called needs 2223 and keep track of it.
Yeah.
And look at it visually and say, what are our teachers telling us? And again, there are so many, the job as being a principal and being a superintendent or being even a district level leader are incredibly complex jobs.
Yes.
And the general public doesn't understand how complex they are because they really think it's like a business model, right? Like you're a boss. But you're not, right? You're a coach.
Not at all.
You're a confidant. You're, in my case, I'm going to tell you, as I advanced in my career, I became a dad. I mean, when people ask me what I did as a superintendent, I'll tell them I'm the dad for the school district. And and sometimes that means you're not popular, right? Because a lot of times as kids, you don't really care for your parents' decisions. But that's really what I mean, in essence, that's what I really felt as a principal and especially as a superintendent. It's like, I'm the dad. I got to make sure our family, our staff does what's best. But at the same time, you got to listen to your children. You got to listen to those you lead. And you got to believe that they have good intent. And that's the one thing that, I would just encourage everybody who's a school leader out there is, believe your teachers have good intent. They really do. Believe in them, support them, listen to them. And I wish I would have done more. And that's why I'm going to keep in retirement doing what I'm doing now and just try to help those who lead our schools in amplifying the voice of their teachers.
Well, Rick, I really appreciate you saying that. It's a honestly theme that comes up a lot. I had a colleague of mine that does a lot of coaching with principals, and one of the things that she'll often talk about is just how often principals are sent to PD that has nothing to do with them because nobody ever talked to the principals first. And very often it happens to me is that a district will reach out to me and will want a certain kind of professional learning. And then we'll ask, okay, well, Tim, what's the scope and sequence going to be? So, well, first I need to speak with the learners, like whoever it's going to be, whether it's principals or teachers or whoever it is, and then I'll have a better sense of what the work is going to be. And that actually tends to be it shouldn't be as jarring as it is in our field in education, but it tends to be not the way we usually go about it. We usually go about kind of setting a vision and implementing and going. And why not? Why not take some time to actually know what our teachers are telling us, and because it's probably right, and probably is not going to take nearly as long as a PLC to fidelity might be. Rick, I'm just so grateful for you being here today, and want to thank everybody, thank our listeners for tuning into our show. Hope everyone learned a thing or two today about perhaps rethinking a thing or two about professional learning communities, at least as we've been taught to implement them so far. And Rick, just thank you so much, just from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you being here and just sharing with such great candor your experience as a leader, and really giving us words to work with as we think through how we might improve, how we use that precious resource of time, and how we turn time into learning, and how we turn time into great school communities. So for more information about me or about the show, please visit us online at tgseducationalconsulting.com. There'll be also some links to Rick's info in the show notes here. Until next time, this is Tim Gravois wishing you continued transformation, growth, and success.